technical, Rodrigo. There we go. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning for Conversations with Extraordinary Leaders. My name is Hope Johnson. I'm the program lead for the Stanford Europe Internship Program. I'm also a member of the University IT here at Stanford. I know we have people coming from all over the world and the US, so thank you for all joining us today. Let's move on to the next slide. So our leaders will be joining us. Steve's going to do the introduction. Steve Gallagher, our moderator, will do the introductions for our panelists. But I just want to welcome you and go over a couple of things before we get started. So if you are able, as you're joining us here, keep your video on, but you feel free to turn it off if you'd rather keep your video off during this event. Mics will be muted. We'll have opportunities for you to share your reactions and applaud throughout the event, but we'll keep mics off for participants. Closed captioning is available, and we do have options for technical questions that you can chat in the Zoom chat with Rodrigo, who is here as our technical support and running behind the scenes show. So this meeting is recorded. We just hit the record button, so it'll be available after the event. So welcome to Stanford. We're very excited to have you here and see you and have you be a part of this event as you're able. So on to the next slide, please. I need to do a land acknowledgement. So this video is an acknowledgement of the land that Stanford is positioned on. So please hit play.
Stanford sits on the ancestral lands of the Muwekma Ohlone tribe.
This land was and continues to be of great importance to the Ohlone people.
Consistent with our values of community and inclusion,
We have a responsibility to acknowledge, honor, and make visible
the university's relationship to Native peoples.
So us making this land acknowledgement is about respect and support for those who resided here before us. In the Zoom chat, there is a link that is available for you to learn more about the lands that we currently inhabit and or ones that you do. So please feel free to click on that link in the Zoom chat and find out more about the ancestral lands that you may be participating from. All right, so next slide, please. We will have Q&A. After the panel discussion, we will have Q&A available to you. There's a form that we'll ask you to use to submit your questions. The link will be also posted in Zoom chat for you to click on and start submitting your questions. We'll put that in now so that you also have that, so you can think about your questions as they're going through the panel discussion. And next, please. I'd like to hand things over to Steve Gallagher, our moderator for today's panel discussion.
Thanks, Hope, and good morning to everybody, and good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast. I'd like to welcome you to this Conversations with Extraordinary Leaders event. I can't tell you how much I have been looking forward to today. My name is Steve Gallagher, and I'm the University Chief Information Officer here at Stanford. This event is sponsored by the Stanford CIO Council's Ideal IT program. And today we welcome friends from across Stanford, Europe programs from across the country, the Ivy Plus universities, and the University of California system. Here at Stanford, IDEAL stands for inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in a learning environment. IDEAL IT is a suite of programs that have been designed to make meaningful and measurable progress in support of Stanford's diversity, equity, and inclusion priorities. One of the foundational pillars of IDEAL IT is our Year Up internship program. And you'll be hearing a lot more about that in just a bit. Today's conversation is about the vision for achieving a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive workplace with a particular focus on the continual journey towards that vision. We are also so fortunate to have two extraordinary leaders with us here today, and it is my honor to introduce them both to you. Patrick Dunkley is Stanford University's Vice Provost for Institutional Equity, Access, and Community. Patrick is the Executive Director of Stanford University's Ideal and Racial Justice Initiatives, and he also directs the Office of Institutional Equity and Access, providing leadership for critical programs that support Stanford's campus community. He also co-chairs the university's Community Board on Public Safety, which is created to advise university leadership on community safety and campus policing. And I'm also really happy to introduce Gerald Chertavian. Gerald and I go back many years, and he is the founder and CEO of Year Up. Gerald is dedicated to closing the opportunity divide that exists in our nation, and he's determined to make his vision a reality. He has combined his entrepreneurial skills and his passion for working with young adults to found Year Up. It's now been 21 years. Year Up has been consistently recognized as one of the nation's top nonprofits. And indeed, Gerald has been committed to working with underserved young adults for more than 3 decades. In fact, I can think of no one I know who has had more of an impact on really making a difference in this world than Gerald. So we'd like to jump right in. I'd like to start with a few opening questions. And the first one is for you, Patrick. Just want to say that there are audience members here today from Year Up and other universities and other organizations who may be unfamiliar with Stanford's Ideal initiative. What are the most important things you would want them to know about Ideal? And what led you to taking on the role of Vice Provost for Institutional Equity, Access, and Community?
First of all, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon. It's great to be here, and I'm very much looking forward to our exchange today. I think the things I would want people most to remember about Ideal is that this is not a program that's designed to layer on top of what we're doing at Stanford. This is really intended to be something that gets woven into the fiber of Stanford and becomes a part of who we are as an institution. And I think that that's really critical because I hear lots of people talking about DEI efforts around the country, in the last few years, and the idea that perhaps some of these are more performative. They're really not intended to make meaningful and sustained change. And from our institution level, from our president and provost down through the leadership, I can tell you that this is an institutional commitment that really is intended to create sustained change. And the kind of change I'm talking about really is an environment where 4 things happen for everyone. And when I say everyone, I'm going to continue to emphasize that because I think when we talk about diversity and inclusion and access, it's really important that we have everyone in mind. But it is a culture and an environment where everyone has the same opportunity to be hired and become a part of our community, where everyone has the opportunity to develop and advance, where everyone works in a place that's free of bias and harassment and discriminatory behavior. And last but not least, where everyone has the opportunity to be their whole and authentic self in the workplace. If we don't have all 4 of those, then we have not succeeded. And it's really important that we keep all 4 of those things in mind. So pivoting to your second question, Steve, about why I said yes to the job. You mentioned earlier that IDEAL stands for inclusion, equity, inclusion, diversity, equity, and access in a learning environment. And when I hear each of those words that are part of that acronym, IDEAL, it resonates with me in a very profound way. And some of it's rooted in my family history. My parents grew up in the rural South in Mississippi and Louisiana, where discrimination was really a largely unquestioned way of life. And the idea of equity and inclusion and diversity was really not much more than a dream. And I remember stories that my parents told me when I was growing up, one in particular that I'll mention, that my father he dropped out of high school when he was 16. He joined the Army. He was a paratrooper, and he was part of the integration of the Army at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And he talks about, he's now since passed away, but he used to talk about how he'd fight side by side with members of the Army who were white, but when they went back to their barracks, they went back to segregated barracks. And when they were on base and they left the base and went into town in Fort Bragg, they'd be subject to, whether they had their uniforms on or not, they were subject to Jim Crow laws. And it was stories like that that lit a fire in me for change. And that fire was really stoked even further when I had my daughters, who are now 18 and 20. And I think about sort of that history of my parents' past and the future for my daughters. And it really makes it easy to want to be that agent of change. And so I see myself as being a servant leader, and I want to serve the Stanford community and the community beyond, to move beyond this history that's stained with bias and inequity, and into a future where people will not be judged by their color or by their color of their skin or by their identity. Or frankly, that they won't be judged at all, but they're just going to be accepted for who they are. And this opportunity and this job I have now gives me the platform to be able to do that. So it was, in a lot of ways, it was an easy way to get to yes.
Patrick, thank you so much for sharing that. Gerald, there may be people in the audience who are unfamiliar with Europe and its mission. What do you want them to know about the organization you founded and lead? And what prompted you to found the organization?
Great. First of all, Steve, thanks so much for having me today. And I'm always inspired by your leadership. And from all the time we've known each other, you've helped to lead on this particular issue of creating access for others. So I just want to, personally say thank you on behalf of all the young people that have benefited from that. And also just say it's an honor to Patrick to be with you here today, and appreciate the story you shared. And it struck in me how proximity is so important to helping one develop a sense of what is important and meaningful to you, and how do you direct yourselves to that. In my case, the reason Europe existed, and I'll explain a tiny bit about Europe, was entirely through the experience I was fortunate to have through the Big Brothers program over now 38 years of working with young people. And in the particular case, I met a boy who was 10 at the time, who lived in what was the most heavily photographed crime scene in New York City back in the 80s, at a very difficult time in New York City. And I was working on Wall Street, and I met him through the Big Brothers, and I spent every Saturday of my life with him for years. And Saturdays was time with David. But after years of Saturdays, I started to see the incredible inequity and injustice in this country, because David's potential, his ability, was being so limited by his zip code, right? By the bank balance of his mom, by the school system he attended, by the color of his skin. We were truly limiting his potential. And it just struck me, man, we cannot waste such incredible human capital that we have in this country for all the wrong reasons. Everyone loses when we don't include everyone in that opportunity. And so that really burned in me at an early age. I was in my 20s, a desire to say, could we fix this in our lifetimes? Could we address this in our lifetimes and close that opportunity divide? And that led me, very fortunately, to start Year Up as what is now a national nonprofit organization that works with low-income 18 to 24-year-olds, and in 1 year or less, empowers those young adults to go from either low income or no income to livable wage careers in the best organizations in this country, including, top of my list, Stanford. And so, working and partnering with Stanford to create opportunity for young people to demonstrate their capacity to add value in a professional work setting, and then become a relevant, valuable source of diverse, skilled, motivated talent We've had the good blessing to work with 35,000 young people over the past 20 years and now place more low-income young adults of color into the Fortune 500 than pretty much any other institution in the United States. And so it's all down to our students being capable and smart, and motivated, but they lacked those runways from which they could take off. And Europe is trying to create those runways and honor the intelligence, ability, and motivation of the young adults we're privileged to serve every day of our lives.
Wow. So thank you for that, Gerald. And you know, Europe, in my experience, is just a win-win-win opportunity. It certainly has been for us here at Stanford. We're now in our third year of our Europe program, and I'm happy to say, post-pandemic, we are back and growing strong. And one of my goals is that everyone gets a little bit more insight into the opportunity of partnering with Europe. And to that end, we have a brief video to show everyone.
Where I got into this career, I was working at UPS, worked at Whole Foods, doing a lot of the retail jobs. And I've always been a tech person, so I was looking to get into, tech.
When you first get accepted to be part of the Europe program, you tell them what you're interested in.
I was never a computer person or anything, so I didn't know if it was for me or not.
Ultimately, it helped me kind of go into IT, because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And then Europe was like, here are your strengths.
Not only do they do the technical side, but they also provide professional help for you.
They teach you professionalism. They teach you how to be in a business environment.
Europe is such a great program, and it really helps people that are motivated and want to work and learn. And I think that's the kind of people that need to be brought into these kind of jobs.
I was surprised they put me to Stanford. I was like, because obviously everyone else, it's Stanford, it's big.
I worked at Whole Foods for 3 years. Before this, I never would have expected working at Stanford.
I started to love Stanford, the community here, because everyone's just trying to help each other.
That connection is really strong, and it just motivates you to keep on working harder.
With Stanford, it's one of the most healthy work environments I've ever experienced.
I would love to stay at Stanford. I love it here, the environment, everyone's so helpful, everyone's supportive.
I truly believe that Europe helps those people that maybe haven't had the best circumstances and kind of gives them an opportunity.
My life changed, and I can't even look back. Everything that I thought about before, that went out I threw out the window and said, no, this is what I'm gonna do now. This is my career. And Europe, they gave me that confidence and they gave me that opportunity.
I think honestly, it's the best choice I ever did. Quitting my full-time job and just sacrificing 1 year for a better opportunity in the future.
All right, and for those of you who participate in Europe programs across the country, I think you can attest the fact that there are similar experiences happening, around the nation. And Gerald, I was hoping that you might be able to speak a little bit more about the opportunity divide, and how has the last 18 months, especially during the pandemic, impacted the work you're leading to close the opportunity divide? What challenges and opportunities have come out of that?
Well, we have in this country today a divide between those who want to get into good jobs, good opportunities, to gain the education they need, and have the motivation. And you're talking millions of young adults. Prior to the pandemic, it was about 22% of all young adults of color in this country, about 16% of all adults in this country who are not connected to those livable wage opportunities. And on the other side, everyone we know, you hear them say, I can't hire people, I need talent, I need skills. So you have this yawning divide between those who want access to opportunity and those who are looking for motivated individuals to take advantage of that opportunity. And it is a tremendous loss for our country. I mean, we cannot have healthy communities without healthy economies, right? This is good for business, good for the community, good for the country, if we can help people get what they need, which was an opportunity to get in the game. So that divide exists because of structural discrimination, because of systems that don't work for those in this country who need access to the education, the housing, the fairness and our justice systems. And so a lot of things combine to make it harder for some than others to get access to opportunity. And sadly, the pandemic exacerbated that. I mean, the community that we serve, which is 95% young adults of color, 100% low-income young adults, was disproportionately impacted by loss of wages in many homes. So many of our students, we had to tremendous and help support into crisis management that came up very quickly in mid-2020. We also had to shift our entire program in thousands of young adults now learning and doing their internships remotely, which meant we had to get all of that equipment and headphones and Wi-Fi connections and laptops all quickly dispersed in order to continue that learning environment. And we learned a lot through that you could actually combine hybrid learning in ways that would be better for students and potentially better for our partners. The pandemic was an incredibly painful passageway through which, if not decades to come. So there was some silver lining in terms of what we learned through the crisis, although it's not on me how proportionally impacted is to say who gets included in economic mobility, the next wave of economic opportunity. Who gets included? Who do we reach out to? Where do we look to hire? As Patrick said, it's about hiring, advancement, having free from bias, and feeling that you belong and can bring your best self. So it's we're inspired fundamentally thinking differently about who's talented and where talent resides in our country.
Thanks, Gerald. We might need to go to audio only because I think we're having some bandwidth issues on your side. Patrick, I'm still sitting with the story you shared about growing up in the South and your dad's journey. And, it's just striking me that, it's 2021 and here we are in the Bay Area and more specifically at Stanford. And I think sometimes it's easy for folks to think, well, that doesn't apply to us, right? We've already solved these problems. And I think one thing that we've learned certainly over the course of the last couple of years has become even more evident that we still have certainly a journey ahead of us. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit about that in terms of how do we actually make meaningful progress? And maybe tell us more about your role in terms of how we can help deepen the community ties as it relates to IDEAL. What do you see as the opportunities?
I see the opportunity as obviously being huge, and I think they are vital to the success of Stanford as a university, but much more broadly to our society. There are, I think it's when I looked at the video, that you just showed. I was inspired by that because I look at the opportunity, and I do want to just give a quick shout out to Ralph and Liz, who are in that video, who are actually working to support this production today, and that's an example of that opportunity, is of the work that they're doing in their role here today. I look at this opportunity of this idea of of belonging. And I think when people look at DEI work, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, they often focus on the diversity part, and I think that part is critical. And unless we create opportunities of the type that that Gerald has been so instrumental in creating, we don't start the pipeline for change. But that's not enough, right? I mean, once we get people into opportunities like Liz and Ralph and the others in the video we have to create an environment where they feel like they belong, where they feel like this is their home and they belong here just as much as anyone else. And I think that's something I know that's something that every employee, even at a place like Stanford, doesn't feel. And I know that based on firsthand knowledge of conversations that I've had with people, moderating listening sessions attended by people who are parts of underrepresented minority communities. And then most recently from a DEI survey that we did on campus that the results were released 2 weeks ago that really drive home in a very profound way and a data-driven way how that these issues exist on our campus. And so we know we have challenges, and so what do we do about them, and what is my role in that? My role is really, this is not a one-person job, and so this is a, if we have 15,000 employees at Stanford, this is a 15,000 person job, right? This is a job where that everybody plays a role, and it doesn't matter if you are in a marginalized community or if you have an opportunity to be an ally. Everybody plays a role in creating this environment where people feel like they belong. And my job is really to try to work with different parts of campus to try and facilitate developing policies and processes and culture change to allow that to happen. And so when I think about what this, I think about that the process and then what it looks like in the end, right? And I think the DEI survey that we did provided us with a baseline of where we are. Have in mind this sort of future state, and then we'll talk later on about how we get there. But it's engaging, it's finding ways to engage with our community so that everybody feels like they have an ownership interest in the development and the sense of belonging that everyone in our community feels. Not that people tolerate differences, but that they embrace them. It's not enough that people are happy to be there. And I remember when I first started out in the business world, I was just happy to be there. I was glad someone gave me an opportunity because I didn't know if I'd have an opportunity. And then over time, it's like it's not enough just to be happy to be there. You want to be the person, you want to be in, to use the borrow term from Hamilton, in the room where it happens, right? But then at some point, it's not enough to be in the room where it happens. You want to have a seat at the table. And at the end, it's really not just even having a seat at the table, it's that everybody has a voice and everybody has an opportunity to be heard. And that's what we're striving for. And that's what we're trying, to develop processes for. And if you have an opportunity to look at the Ideal survey website, you'll see a lot of action steps that we're taking going forward to, that are already in process to try and get them there. I'm in a fortunate place right now. I'm at a point in my career where I feel like I have a voice and that my voice is being heard. But now my job is to facilitate the creation of that opportunity for everybody else on the Stanford campus, who will then take that out to others outside the Stanford campus and really create this domino effect that allows everyone to be a contributor, a true contributor.
Yeah, here across the IT community at Stanford, we continually reaffirm a core value, and that value is that working in a diverse and inclusive workplace is not just a better place to work, it actually produces better outcomes for our entire community, sort of building on the points that you were just making. And I'm wondering, Gerald, what are your thoughts there, given that, Europe, quite honestly, was and remains a core approach in terms of building up our pipeline of getting great talent, into our organization. But to Patrick's point, we need to really ensure that the entire community is inclusive. And what's your experience in terms of how successful organizations create that inclusive environment that actually helps everyone thrive?
Absolutely. And if there's any delay, I know the folks at Stanford, if there is a delay, you can take off the video. So apologies for that. I'm not sure why that's happened. I think what Patrick said is really profound. And when you think about what he said, is representation is necessary but insufficient, right? Insufficient to create what is really about equity and inclusion. And I think what it takes, Steve, from my experience, is it takes leadership who is willing to first look inwardly and to really listen and to understand what is the true lived experience of underrepresented groups in our community, and to accept that we have been socialized in systems that actually have discrimination in them. That does not mean we're bad people. It did not mean we're racist. It does mean that we have to accept that systemic discrimination is real, and it's like a toxin. It has infected all of the water that we consume, all of the systems we get in. And the fact is we have to disrupt it because it does exist. But in order to disrupt it, we first have to see how is it impacting those and others who may feel that they don't belong and not included. And our organizations are still run in many cases by white men. And I would posit that most white men have walked into rooms in business their entire lives and felt like they belong, felt like they have power, felt like they are included. And it's perhaps hard for them at times to realize many people don't get to feel like that every single day. And so then to ask yourself, what might it take for everyone to feel as though they belong? And I think it starts with listening, learning, and leadership. In the leadership, in fact, I was talking to the first year class at MIT Sloan School, and they have taken 3 days to help students understand that you cannot separate leadership from diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're inseparable concepts in today's society, and how powerful that is to understand that to lead in a pluralistic society, one has to invest in their own journey, in supporting the journeys of others, to actually say, what is it going to take to create environments in which each person feels as though they can bring their authentic selves and that they belong. And I tell you, maybe I'm 1 or 2 steps down this journey. It's not about a destination. It's about a commitment to first look at yourself and then to understand the influence and power you have to disrupt the existing systems, which have conspired to make it harder for some than others.
Just building on this theme and back to you, Patrick, you mentioned about ensuring that people's voices are heard. And, we have so much data now, given the survey that you just referenced, which in many ways affirmed a lot of themes that we already knew. And I think there's a real interest in meaningful progress, knowing that this is a long-term journey. And I'm just curious, Patrick, what are your thoughts on how we ensure that people are feeling and seeing that progress to provide the optimism and to really address the concerns that folks feel, especially from groups that still often feel marginalized?
See, that's a tough question. I mean, it's a tough question to answer because people are tired. People are frustrated. The issues we're talking about, when you talk to people in in communities of color, in the disabled community, in the LGBTQ community, and you say that these issues exist, and there's a survey, their response is, we didn't need a survey to tell us what that. We already know that. We've been telling you that. And so the thing the tension you describe is a difficult one, because I don't think, as Gerald mentioned, these are systemic issues, and it is hard to change systemic issues. I would say it's impossible to change systemic issues overnight. These are issues that we need to change. We need to change people, and we need to change systems, and we need to do them simultaneously. And those things will take time. And so I agree with you, Steve, that we have to find ways to show progress, meaningful progress in a sustained way over time, while also giving people hope that they can trust that people are actually doing the work that they say they're doing. And I think one of the ways we do that is what we've really started out with now with this survey, right? I mean, I think one of the concerns about doing a survey, was would Stanford be transparent about the survey results? I think if you look at the website, you'll see that there's transparency there. Then I think the next step is, kind of what Gerald talked about. Institutions have to acknowledge that an issue exists. You can't change something that you don't acknowledge exists. And I think our institution has acknowledged that. Both the president and provost have acknowledged that these issues exist, and that they have that there's no place at Stanford for these kind of behaviors. So now we have this baseline data, we have acknowledgement, we have what I sort of described earlier as kind of this future state. Now we have to fill in the pieces of how we get there, and we have to create goals that are meaningful and that are measurable. And then we have to be transparent about our accountability. And I think the other step I'll mention is that in addition to developing these goals, they can't be developed in isolation. It can't be leadership getting in a room and deciding, here's what our goals are, right? We need to include the community in this goal setting process, because these are goals for the community. And so as we move forward, one of the things we will be doing is engaging with affinity groups and other groups on campus to understand what types of steps we need to make to establish these goals, and then how we will go about measuring. So it really is a community-centered approach, I think, that's necessary, because if people are engaged in the process, then they feel like they have then they know where we're going, and they don't feel like this is something that's being done in a vacuum. And so those are really the things that are our next steps, and I think are really important to engage in community, so they not only see what's going on, but they have a role in what's going on.
Great. Well, listen, I know that we've got lots of questions from our audience who would like to get in, and so I'm going to hand back to Hope for this next section of our Q&A.
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, everyone. The link to the Q&A form is posted in Zoom chat. And I do want to acknowledge, I apologize that our closed captioning is not working. We will have a transcript available afterwards, but please do feel free to populate your questions in that form that we have available. I have Liz and Ralph here with me today. They are actually your Q&A moderators. They are going to be asking these important questions of our leaders here today. So I'd like to invite them. Liz and Ralph, want to introduce yourselves?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Liz Chacon, and I am a Year Up alum, and I'm also part of the Stanford University Service Desk, and it's great to be here with you all.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ralph Esguerra. I'm also a Europe alum, graduated last year. I am part of the ServiceNow operations team here at Stanford University.
All right, Liz, you want to take the first question, and then you and Ralph trade off?
Definitely. So the first question is a question for Patrick, and the question is, the results from Stanford's DEI survey were recently released. How can a program like the Europe internship program at Stanford fit into our plans in response to needs exposed by the survey?
Thank you. That's a good question. And one of the more frustrating things I hear with a high degree of frequency when it comes to the diversity part of DEI is it's a pipeline problem. And I get so tired of hearing it's a pipeline problem because we can fix, if it's a pipeline problem, we can fix it by increasing what's in the pipeline. And I think that's what Europe really does. And again, the fact that you and Ralph are here today are an example of when we have an intentional effort in trying to increase the people who are in the pipeline, we get results, right? And so that's, I think, they're not only, I think is Europe great, but we need more Europes, right? We need more vehicles that provide opportunities to people who wouldn't otherwise have them, because it's not that people they're not willing and they're not capable, they're just not given the opportunity, right? And so I think, Europe, is really important in the work that it's doing, but we need more organizations like Europe to also assist in that process.
Great, thank you for your answer.
Can I add one thing to that, Liz, if that's okay?
Definitely.
I think I'll take my video off, sorry. I think one of the opportunities is, Europe has worked with Stanford, and what the opportunity is then Stanford in and of itself can say, okay, there's some practices here that we can apply in different areas, right? I was just talking to an organization that had used and worked with Europe for years and years. And they said, you know what? We're going to work with folks in our organization who are doing lower level jobs today, and we're going to get a whole retraining, reskilling opportunity and employ some of the techniques and practices we know that Europe has done well in, and we can do this ourselves. And we're going to go out to high schools and create a summer program to get folks exposed to the organization. And so really it's about the practices that lead to equitable and inclusive talent management that I think what we're working with companies on is, yes, Europe does them as a program, but the practices can apply across many, many different areas of an organization. And ultimately the organization builds that competency capacity to do this at scale. And as Patrick said, that can be systemically important for an organization long term. So Europe has a whole consulting arm that helps companies and organizations do this, but we had to learn 20 years what actually is needed, what works, and how do you then scale that. So I'm encouraged by the opportunity that Stanford has across the entire platform of Stanford.
Great, thank you for your response. And I'm going to pass it off to Ralph for the next question.
All right. I have a question for Gerald here. The question here is, the Stanford and Europe partnership continues to grow. We are so excited to expand our partnership. How is Europe planning to keep up with the needs and new skills tracks?
The most important thing Europe needs to do is listen to Stanford. So as Steve and his team and others say, here's where the skills are going. Here's the needs, how they're changing. Here's where we need folks tomorrow. I was talking to a large financial institution and they said our call centers are going to decrease significantly, and digitization is going to increase radically. And therefore we'll have probably a shift of 10,000 people in terms of decline in one area, growth in another. And here's where the puck is going in terms of skills. So we need to listen to Stanford, and actually we've been doing that to help add new parts of our curriculum around project management in other areas, directly in response to what Steve and the team are telling us they see as future needs for a competency and skill in the organization. Our job is to keep developing and meeting those needs for skill and meeting the needs that Stanford has for talent across the entire organization.
And Gerald, if I could just jump in on that one, because it's worth noting that there are so many Silicon Valley companies who've had great success with Europe. LinkedIn has, I think Facebook has its own campus. I know LinkedIn's a big partner. How are you sort of managing growth on your side in terms of meeting the demand? Because Europe interns are so in demand and so well regarded.
Yeah, it's something we're working with now, Steve, to figure out how can we kind of increase our ability to scale the program. So we're working on that as we speak. And one of the things we're learning is that there are some other training programs out there that are teaching hard skills, say cybersecurity or data analytics. And we can take that young adult who's already had some good quality hard skill training, provide the wraparound support, the professional skills that many of our students would talk about how instrumental that was, and then place them into jobs. So imagine working with someone who's already gotten halfway down the track, but still was disconnected from a good livable wage job. And so Europe is experimenting with that across the country now in an effort to say what would help us scale exponentially, because the demand is more than we can handle right now. And so we're challenging ourselves to be as innovative and creative as possible to keep serving those we care about, to do it authentically, to hold ourselves accountable, but to challenge ourselves to say what would be more scalable and allow more young people to get access to opportunity in this country.
Okay, thank you for that, Gerald. Liz?
Thanks, Ralph. So the next question is directed to Patrick. So this one says, please comment specifically on how inclusivity of the disabled community and digital accessibility will be addressed. It seems like digital accessibility in particular is rarely considered.
And I will say that the disabled community is one that I think, there are people who have, called it sort of the invisible, these are invisible, they're invisible disabilities, or this community is invisible because people don't recognize its existence. And I'm one to acknowledge that we have a long way to go to address the needs of the disabled community. We have a task force that we've developed out of IDEAL that's looking at how to address the needs of the disabled community. We're just getting started. We just had actually we haven't had our first meeting yet. It's coming up before the winter closure. So I don't have specifics on how we're going to address those needs, but I can tell you that they have been identified, and and it's something that there are specific efforts that's being worked on to get there, and something that's important to me that we address.
Yeah, Gerald, did you have anything to add?
No, I thought Patrick handled that well. It's my only add there is, if we change practices that support one group who has been disadvantaged, it's often creates a competency that extends to other groups who have been disadvantaged. And so I think there's a lot of learning in what does it take to include and belong, and what types of adaptations or practice changes are required. But I often think that the commitment to support one group does not exclude the learning and the ability to use that and leverage that to make sure that more groups, individuals who have not felt included, belong, or had access have that in the future. So I think there's potentially a multiplier effect as an organization gets better and better at building this competency across its organization.
Great, thank you. Ralph, do we have time for one more question?
I have a question here for everyone. And the question is, can you talk a little bit about identifying diversity that may not be so visible? How can we get people to feel comfortable, be more transparent about their diversity?
Patrick?
I think it starts with creating an environment where they're not, people aren't penalized for sharing their diversity. I think in a lot of ways, we've created these environments where people feel like they have to conceal their identity, or they have to code switch, or they have to hide their disability. We have to create an environment where those things are not necessary, where people don't feel like that's something they have to do to fit in. One of the things that we're doing on on campus is what's called the ideal learning journey, and it is an educational program, and I don't call it training because I think that training gives this image of something you do, you sit down, you spend a couple of hours and you go about your work, and this is really a program that's intended to really get people to challenge their biases and to identify them and to be vulnerable about the things that they have biases about. We just got done with a pilot program that involved 250 employees, and it's going to be rolled out to the rest of the staff beginning in 2022. And I think that's what really has to happen is we have to get to a place where people the burden is not on the people. It's not on the people who have disabilities. It's not on people of color to get people to accept them. It's that that people understand they have biases and that they acknowledge them and they change their behavior. That's really where the change needs to happen. So that this ideal learning journey is really an important step to getting us there. And there's also some faculty DEI training that's going on as well. And so I think these are the types of things that are necessary to continue to move us along this path. As Gerald said earlier, it's not a destination, it's a journey, and this is part of that journey.
That's really well said, Patrick. And I think there's a particular responsibility that those who are entrusted to manage others in where you have positional authority truly have a higher level of responsibility to understand their impact on others as it relates to the question that you posed around people feeling comfortable bringing their identity, people feeling included. And so I think that one would want that to be instinctive, but I'd say in the absence of being instinctive, what tools and techniques can we help to adopt as managers? And Patrick talked about some of the training. I think getting managers to be comfortable asking vulnerable questions like, how does what I just said make you feel, right? Or how am I contributing to the challenge we're currently experiencing? Or to literally in your notebook, has everyone had a chance to speak, especially the person who may be a little quieter or may be a little less confident that their voice will be heard. The managers, the leaders, the people managers have a responsibility to say, am I doing this in ways that are creating greater inclusivity, greater equity? And we should measure that with performance management systems, with feedback systems, and reward our managers who are creating those environments and support all of us to get better and better at that. So it's an institutional system that hopefully over time creates something we would all want to be instinctive. And it's going to take time, but it's around leadership, it's around measurement and training, in a commitment to say that there is a dividend, there is an equity dividend, as Heather McGee wrote about in her book, The Sum of Us, that getting this right, everyone wins. There is no loss for white people as people of color and underrepresented communities have more purchase power and voice. There's a dividend that all of us will benefit from by getting this right. And I'm certainly encouraged, Patrick, to hear your thoughts and perspectives on this, and know it'll benefit the community at Stanford greatly.
I'll just add briefly to that and just say, in addition to just celebrating the power of what comes with a diverse and inclusive workplace, I think that we also need to establish a culture that is not tolerant of intolerance, that people feel safe to actually be who they are. And just as an example to the question that was asked, our neurodiversity program, Neurodiversity in Technology, just having that program has made folks who may not be participating in the program, but feel more comfortable to come out, if you will, as being neurodiverse in the sense of seeing the world differently than maybe some of their peers. So I think part of this is really setting the culture and actually really making it a safe and an inclusive workplace. So Hope, I think we need to hand back to you.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all for joining us today. We have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to say thank you. We appreciate your time this morning. I wanted to just acknowledge everyone that helped put this event together. These are the names. You saw some of the faces. You've heard their voices here today that made this event happen, but all of you too for coming here and participating. So thank you for submitting your questions. Thank you for sitting in with us and listening in to Steve, Gerald, and Patrick as they share their wisdom. For those of you registered, we can share links and other things that came from this event, as well as the recording link and the transcript. So thank you all for your participation. And now's the time. Use the reactions to clap, applaud. We can turn on your mics and you can say thank you, applaud to the group. We're very, very welcome that you're here, very grateful that you came today.
Thank you.
And with that, I really want to thank my friends, Patrick and Gerald, for joining us here today for this fantastic conversation. I admire you both so much, and we really appreciate it. And thank you, everybody who joined us this morning.
Thank you, Steve.